The silence in the auditorium was thick, a suffocating blanket woven from anticipation and thinly veiled contempt. Principal Thompson, a man whose tailored suit seemed to constrict his already rigid posture, gestured with an imperious hand toward the grand piano at the center of the stage. His voice, usually booming, was now a low, mocking growl, amplified by the barely concealed snickers from the assembled middle school students. "Arthur," he announced, the name dripping with condescension, "the stage is yours. Show us what you can really do." The spotlights, typically reserved for school plays and talent shows, glared down, illuminating every speck of dust dancing in the air, but more intensely, they illuminated the small, rigid figure of Arthur, standing beside the imposing instrument. His hands, usually clasped tightly together, twitched almost imperceptibly at his sides, betraying a nervous energy he desperately tried to contain. The air crackled with a cruel expectation, a collective breath held, waiting for the inevitable spectacle of his discomfort, a performance orchestrated not for applause, but for public humiliation. A whisper snaked through the rows of students. "He's going to freeze." Another, louder, "He can't even look at us." The principal's thin smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He leaned into the microphone, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. "Go on, Arthur. Don't be shy now. Everyone's waiting." The implicit threat hung heavy in the air, a demand for compliance under the guise of encouragement. Arthur's eyes, usually averted, darted up for a split second, catching the principal's gaze before quickly dropping to the worn wooden stage floor. His pale face was a mask of stoicism, but a faint tremor ran through his slight frame. He felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment, pressing down on him, trying to force him into a mold he could never fit. The stage felt vast, exposed, a cruel arena designed to highlight his perceived inadequacies, a stark contrast to the quiet, predictable safety of his own mind. The principal's sigh was theatrical, loaded with mock patience. "Arthur, we don't have all day. Perhaps a simple scale, something easy for everyone to understand." The emphasis on easy was a direct jab, a public reminder of what Thompson viewed as Arthur's limitations. The humiliation was palpable, a tangible force pressing down on Arthur, making his already rigid muscles even tighter. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, a flush of shame and indignation, but he fought to keep his expression blank, to betray no weakness. The scent of old wood polish and cheap disinfectant from the auditorium chairs filled his nostrils, overwhelming his senses, making it harder to focus, harder to breathe. Each tick of the large, ornate clock on the wall above the stage echoed in his ears, amplifying the agonizing stretch of time, making every second feel like an eternity under the harsh glare of the lights. A few students in the front row began to shift uncomfortably, a ripple of unease spreading through the audience as the principal's badgering continued. Even some teachers exchanged hesitant glances, though none dared to challenge Thompson's authority. Arthur took a small, deliberate step toward the piano, his movements stiff, almost robotic. He could hear the faint, high-pitched hum of the fluorescent lights, a sound that always grated on his sensitive ears, now magnified by the intense stress of the moment. His fingers, usually so precise and controlled, felt clumsy, alien. He longed for the quiet solitude of his own world, the intricate patterns and predictable rhythms that made sense to him, so unlike this chaotic, emotionally charged public spectacle. This was not a performance. It was a dissection, an exhibition of difference disguised as a lesson. Principal Thompson, mistaking Arthur's slow approach for reluctance or stubbornness, took another step closer, his shadow falling over the boy. "Come now, Arthur. Just a few notes. Surely you can manage that, can't you?" His voice was dangerously low, a clear threat beneath the veneer of false encouragement. Arthur's stomach churned, a knot of anxiety tightening with each word. He hated being put on the spot, hated the unpredictable chaos of social interactions, especially when he was the focus of so many judging eyes. The glossy black surface of the piano seemed to mock him, reflecting the glaring lights and the indistinct faces of the audience, a distorted mirror of his own discomfort. He yearned to disappear, to simply vanish from the overwhelming sensory input and the oppressive weight of their collective scrutiny, to retreat into the intricate, orderly world of his own mind. The air grew heavier, thick with unspoken accusations and the principal's unrelenting pressure. Arthur's jaw was clenched tight, a subtle tremor running through his thin shoulders. He could feel the familiar prickle of tears forming behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall, refusing to give Principal Thompson the satisfaction of seeing him break. Every fiber of his being screamed for escape, for the freedom to be himself without judgment, without this excruciating public display. This moment, designed to crush his spirit and reinforce his perceived inadequacy, was instead solidifying a quiet, unyielding resolve deep within him. He would not be broken. He would not give them what they expected. The world might see him as broken or less, but he knew deep down that he was simply different, and in his difference lay a strength they could not even begin to comprehend. Arthur Finch, all angles and quiet intensity, stood an inch or two taller than most boys his age, though his slender frame made him seem more fragile than he was. His dark, neatly combed hair fell across a forehead that often seemed furrowed in deep thought, and his eyes, a remarkable shade of hazel, usually held a distant, inward gaze, as if perpetually observing a world only he could see. Today, however, they were downcast, fixed on the scuffed toes of his worn sneakers. His clothes, a slightly too large navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants, were always impeccably clean, chosen by his foster mother for their practicality rather than any sense of style. He rarely met anyone's gaze, a habit often misinterpreted as shyness or disinterest, when in reality, direct eye contact could feel overwhelmingly intense, like staring directly into a bright, unshielded light, scrambling his thoughts and making it impossible to process information. His hands, slim and surprisingly long, were usually engaged in a repetitive, soothing motion, sometimes tracing invisible patterns on his thigh, other times gently rubbing the smooth texture of a small polished stone he carried in his pocket. These movements were his anchors, quiet rituals that helped him navigate the turbulent waters of external stimuli. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was a subtle, almost imperceptible upturn of the corners of his lips, a private moment of contentment shared only with himself. His posture was often rigid, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he were trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable in a world that often felt too loud, too chaotic, and too unpredictable. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, a silent resilience that belied his apparent fragility, a deep well of self-containment. Inside Arthur's mind, the world was a symphony of intricate patterns and logical sequences, a complex tapestry of sensory information that he processed with astonishing depth and detail. While others heard a simple melody, Arthur heard every individual note, every harmonic overtone, every subtle vibration in the air. He perceived the world in high definition, a constant stream of data that, while sometimes overwhelming, also offered him unique insights. His thoughts didn't flow in linear narratives, but in interconnected webs, linking disparate pieces of information in ways most people couldn't fathom. He remembered dates, names, and musical compositions with startling accuracy, his internal library vast and meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the often disordered external environment he inhabited daily. Memories were vivid, almost tactile for Arthur. He could recall the exact shade of blue of the principal's tie from last Tuesday, the faint scent of cinnamon from the school cafeteria on Fridays, or the precise rhythm of the janitor's footsteps echoing down the hall. These details, often unnoticed by others, formed the rich, detailed fabric of his inner world, providing a sense of comfort and predictability. When conversations became too abstract or emotionally charged, he would retreat into these sensory memories, finding solace in their precision. His mind was not a blank slate, but a meticulously constructed archive, each piece of information filed away for later retrieval, often surprising those who underestimated his capacity for retention and understanding, for his ability to connect seemingly unrelated facts. Emotionally, Arthur felt everything with profound intensity, though he struggled to express these feelings in ways others understood. Joy was an effervescent burst of color, sadness a heavy, suffocating weight, anger a sharp, jarring discord. He processed emotions not as fleeting sensations, but as deep, resonant experiences, often overwhelming in their raw power. This deep emotional intelligence was hidden beneath his quiet demeanor. often mistaken for indifference or a lack of feeling. He intuitively understood the subtle nuances of human interaction, not through social cues he couldn't always read, but through the underlying emotional frequencies, the unspoken anxieties or joys radiating from others. He simply lacked the conventional tools to translate these complex internal states into outwardly visible expressions. His unique logic often led him to unconventional solutions or perspectives, seeing connections that others missed entirely. He wasn't hampered by preconceived notions or social expectations, allowing his mind to explore possibilities freely, unfettered by conventional wisdom. This made him an exceptional problem solver, though his methods were often misunderstood or dismissed as peculiar. He approached the world like a vast, intricate puzzle, each piece fitting together in a precise, logical order. When something didn't make sense, when a rule seemed arbitrary or an emotion illogical, it caused him profound discomfort, a disruption in the harmonious order he craved. His sensitivity, often seen as a weakness, was in fact the very lens through which he perceived the extraordinary in the mundane, uncovering beauty in overlooked details. Northwood Middle School was a sprawling, red-brick monolith, typical of many public schools in suburban America. Its hallways, lined with lockers in various shades of institutional beige, echoed with the cacophony of adolescent energy, a soundscape that often grated on Arthur's heightened senses. The classrooms were uniform, rows of desks facing a whiteboard, designed for conformity rather than individualized learning. Here, deviation from the norm was often met with a mixture of confusion and impatience, a system built to process students en masse, often overlooking the nuanced needs of those who didn't fit neatly into its prescribed boxes. The air was heavy with the scent of floor wax and stale lunch, a combination that always made Arthur subtly nauseous, adding to his daily discomfort in this bustling environment. His foster home, a small, neat bungalow on the quieter side of town, offered a stark contrast. Mrs. Henderson, a kind-faced woman with perpetually flour-dusted hands, provided a structured, predictable environment, a sanctuary from the sensory overload of the school day. She understood Arthur's need for routine, for quiet spaces, and for meals served at precisely the same time each evening. Yet even her gentle nature couldn't entirely shield him from the broader community's subtle judgments. Whispers followed him at the grocery store, curious stares in the park, a constant reminder that his differences were visible, often a source of discomfort for those around him. The neighborhood itself was close-knit, full of well-meaning but often uninformed people who relied on stereotypes rather than seeking understanding. In the school, authority figures like Ms. Davies, Arthur's homeroom teacher, embodied the systemic biases. Ms. Davies was well-intentioned but overwhelmed, her classroom a constant struggle for control. She saw Arthur as a disruption, an anomaly that defied her lesson plans and classroom management strategies. His quiet stims, his aversion to group work, and his occasional verbal outbursts when overwhelmed were viewed as behavioral problems rather than manifestations of his neurodivergence. She often resorted to sighs of exasperation, sending him to the quiet corner, or simply ignoring him, hoping he would self-regulate, inadvertently reinforcing his isolation. Her attempts at inclusion were superficial, focused on physical presence rather than genuine engagement or understanding of his unique learning style. Principal Thompson, however, was a different breed of authority. He prided himself on efficiency and discipline, running the school like a well-oiled machine where every cog had its place. To him, Arthur was not just a challenge, but an inconvenience, a wrench in his perfectly calibrated system. He viewed Arthur's autism not as a different way of experiencing the world, but as a deficit, a flaw that needed to be corrected, or, failing that, contained. He believed that tough love and public exposure would force Arthur to adjust, to conform to the norms of the school environment. His interactions with Arthur were always tinged with a patronizing tone, a thinly veiled impatience that bordered on disdain, a clear demonstration of his narrow-minded approach to education and individual differences. The school's counseling department, underfunded and overworked, offered little real support. Mrs. Chen, the school counselor, provided generic platitudes and suggested behavioral charts that never quite fit Arthur's needs. She saw the diagnosis, but struggled to see the child behind it, relying on textbook definitions rather than truly engaging with Arthur's unique strengths and challenges. The school system, in its well-meaning but ultimately flawed structure, prioritized standardized testing and conventional achievement, leaving little room for the unconventional brilliance that often lay hidden beneath a surface of difference. The pressure to meet targets and maintain order often overshadowed the individual needs of students who didn't fit the mold, especially those like Arthur, whose gifts were not immediately apparent or easily categorized. The community, too, played a subtle role in perpetuating the exclusion. Parents on the PTA lauded Principal Thompson's firm hand, believing it instilled discipline. They wanted their children to succeed in a competitive world, and anyone who seemed to slow down the process, anyone who was different, was often viewed with a degree of apprehension or even suspicion. This collective unconscious bias, though rarely overtly malicious, created an environment where Arthur was constantly on the periphery, an outsider looking in, his true capabilities unseen and unappreciated. The oppressive structure was woven into the very fabric of daily interactions, from the way teachers spoke to him to the way peers avoided him, all reinforcing the idea that his worth was less because his mind worked differently. Arthur's musical perception was extraordinary, a gift that manifested in subtle, almost imperceptible ways to the casual observer. He didn't just hear the school bell, he heard the precise frequency of its tone, noting the slight dissonance in its decay. During music class, while other students struggled with simple melodies on recorders, Arthur would silently correct the teacher's piano playing in his head, identifying a flat note or a missed chord progression with absolute precision. He never spoke these observations aloud, knowing from experience that his corrections were often met with exasperation rather than appreciation. His mind processed sound like a complex algorithm, dissecting each auditory input into its constituent parts, discerning patterns and harmonies that were invisible to others, a truly synesthetic experience. One afternoon, during a particularly chaotic band practice, the music teacher, Mr. Harrison, was struggling to tune the school orchestra's string section. The cacophony of slightly off-key instruments grated on everyone's ears, but for Arthur, it was almost physically painful. He sat quietly in the back, tracing patterns on his desk with a pencil, his face a mask of discomfort. Suddenly, without warning, he mumbled a sequence of numbers, almost too soft to hear. A string, 3rd fret, 440.03 hertz. Mr. Harrison, distracted, merely glanced at him, assuming it was a random, unrelated utterance, and continued to fumble with his tuning fork, completely missing the precise, actionable information Arthur had just provided, information that would have instantly resolved his problem. His numerical memory was equally astounding. He could recall the exact seating arrangement of every student in the school cafeteria for the past month, including who sat next to whom and what they ate on any given day. This wasn't a deliberate act of memorization. It was simply how his brain organized information. During a math lesson, when the teacher presented a complex, multi-step problem on the board, Arthur would already have the solution, having mentally calculated it within seconds. When asked how, he would simply state, "It just appeared," a response that often earned him a skeptical look or a dismissive wave, the teacher assuming he was either guessing or had somehow peaked at an answer key rather than acknowledging his innate, rapid computational ability. His engineering logic was subtly present in his interactions with everyday objects. He could spend hours disassembling and reassembling broken toys, not just fixing them, but often improving their mechanisms in ways the original manufacturers hadn't conceived. He once rewired a faulty classroom projector in minutes, bypassing a complicated circuit board with a few ingenious adjustments, a task that had stumped the school's IT specialist for hours. When he attempted to explain his process, using precise technical terms and intricate diagrams he sketched on scrap paper, the principal dismissed it as tinkering and instructed him to leave the electronics to the professionals, failing to grasp the depth of his intuitive understanding of complex systems. Pattern detection was another of Arthur's silent superpowers. He could predict the exact moment the school bell would ring by the subtle shift in the hallway chatter, or anticipate a teacher's next question based on their intonation and body language. He saw recurring sequences in everything, the subtle variations in the principal's gait that indicated his mood, the repeating architectural motifs in the school building, the underlying rhythm in a crowded playground. These insights, however, were often mistaken for obsessive tendencies or social awkwardness rather than an advanced form of perception. His ability to discern hidden structures and predict outcomes was a form of silent brilliance, a powerful cognitive tool that allowed him to navigate a chaotic world with a surprising degree of foresight, though it went unrecognized. These manifestations of his exceptional abilities were consistently overlooked, dismissed, or misunderstood by the adults around him. Teachers saw his intense focus on details as rigid fixation, not as a pathway to deeper understanding. His quiet observations were mistaken for disengagement. His unconventional solutions were seen as strange rather than innovative. The school system, designed for a different kind of learner, simply didn't have the framework to recognize or nurture his unique gifts. His brilliance was a whispered secret, hidden in plain sight, a powerful current flowing beneath a calm, seemingly unremarkable surface, waiting for anyone to truly see it. His genius remained a quiet rebellion against a world that refused to acknowledge its unconventional forms, a silent testament to his profound, unseen capabilities. The constant misunderstanding was a slow, corrosive acid, eating away at Arthur's already fragile sense of belonging. Each dismissive glance, every impatient sigh, every whispered judgment chipped away at his spirit, deepening the chasm between his rich inner world and the uncomprehending exterior. He felt like an alien observing a foreign planet, desperate to communicate, but lacking the universal language. The emotional cost was immense. He often retreated further into himself, his quietness becoming a protective shell against the onslaught of a world that seemed determined to prove him inadequate. The playground, once a place of distant observation, became a chaotic arena he actively avoided, preferring the quiet solitude of the library or an empty classroom, seeking refuge from the relentless social demands. Isolation became his default state, a coping mechanism against the pain of rejection. He found solace in predictability, in the silent, rhythmic bounce of a small rubber ball against a wall, or the meticulous arrangement of his colored pencils by shade and size. These internal routines were his anchors, providing a sense of control in a world that often felt utterly uncontrollable. When overwhelmed by sensory input, the shrill fire alarm, the sudden slam of a locker, the chaotic chatter of the cafeteria, he would retreat into a hidden corner of his mind, counting prime numbers or mentally replaying complex musical sequences, a self-soothing ritual that offered a momentary escape from the unbearable intensity of his environment, a necessary act of self-preservation. His suffering was a silent scream, unheard by those around him. He didn't lash out or cry dramatically. Instead, his distress manifested in heightened self-stimulatory behaviors, a slight rocking back and forth, or a more intense focus on repetitive hand movements. His foster mother, Mrs. Henderson, noticed his withdrawal at home, his increased reluctance to talk about school, and the slight tremor in his hands when he was particularly stressed. She knew his quietness wasn't emptiness, but a sign of deep internal turmoil, yet she often felt powerless against the systemic indifference he faced outside their home, recognizing the limits of her own advocacy in a world that prioritized conformity. The cruelty of his peers, often fueled by a lack of understanding and the tacit permission of indifferent adults, was a sharp, constant pain. Taunts about his weirdness or his robot-like movements became background noise, yet each one chipped away at his fragile self-esteem. He learned to become invisible, to navigate the hallways like a ghost, hoping that by blending into the periphery, he might avoid becoming a target. This constant need for self-effacement was a heavy burden, stifling his natural curiosity and inhibiting his already challenging attempts at social interaction, reinforcing the idea that his true self was something to be hidden, something shameful. His brilliance, a vibrant, multifaceted jewel, remained hidden beneath layers of social anxiety and institutional neglect. While he could mentally deconstruct a complex musical piece note by note, he struggled to answer a simple question about his weekend in front of the class. This stark contrast between his extraordinary inner world and his struggling external presentation was a source of profound, quiet agony. He knew what he was capable of. He understood the intricate beauty of the world in ways others couldn't, Yet he was constantly being told, implicitly and explicitly, that these very gifts were either irrelevant or, worse, a disability that hindered his participation in the conventional world, a painful irony. The tension around him tightened with each passing day, a suffocating pressure. He was a square peg in a round hole, trying desperately to force himself into a shape that caused him only pain and frustration. His coping mechanisms, once effective, began to fray under the relentless pressure. He yearned for a moment of genuine connection, for someone to see past the outward differences, to the profound well of intelligence and emotion that lay within. The world demanded conformity, but Arthur's very essence was a rebellion against it, a silent testament to the beauty of human variation, a unique melody waiting to be heard amidst the discordant noise of misunderstanding, a quiet, growing desperation for true validation. The fluorescent lights in the auditorium hummed, their drone amplifying the principal's sharp voice as he called Arthur back to the stage. "Arthur, it seems we have a misunderstanding. You were instructed to play the piano. Are you defying a direct order?" Principal Thompson's tone was laced with menace, his gaze fixed on Arthur, daring him to refuse. A hushed ripple went through the audience, a collective intake of breath. This was more than a performance, it was an interrogation, a public shaming designed to assert the principal's authority and expose Arthur's perceived deficiencies to everyone present. The air crackled with hostility, and the uncomfortable silence pressed down on Arthur, making his skin prickle with a mixture of fear and growing indignation. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in his ears. He could feel the familiar tightness in his chest, a sign of mounting anxiety, but beneath it, a tiny spark of defiance flickered. He knew the principal intended to humiliate him, to prove his problematic nature to the entire school. He took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts, to focus on the orderly patterns that existed within the chaos. The principal's stern gaze, usually enough to make any student crumble, felt different this time. It was less about authority and more about a profound misunderstanding, a blindness to anything outside his rigid expectations. Arthur gripped his hands tightly, a silent struggle playing out within him. Principal Thompson, misinterpreting Arthur's silence as stubbornness or fear, escalated his attack. He walked closer to the piano, his polished shoes clicking loudly on the stage, the sound reverberating through the hushed hall. "This isn't a game, Arthur. This is about respect, about demonstrating that you can follow simple instructions. Do you understand?" His voice was dangerously soft, a chilling contrast to the public nature of the confrontation. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the escalating cruelty of the moment. Arthur remained still, his eyes fixed on the piano keys, their black and white surfaces suddenly seeming like a lifeline. A familiar landscape in an otherwise hostile environment, a silent promise of order. The principal then turned to the assembled students, his voice now booming, projecting his frustration onto the entire audience. "You see, sometimes we have students who just don't want to cooperate. They think their unique challenges excuse them from basic expectations." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a clear, derogatory reference to Arthur's neurodivergence. Arthur flinched internally, feeling the heat of shame creep up his neck, but a colder, harder emotion began to solidify within him: indignation. This wasn't just about him. It was about the principal's ignorance, his deliberate choice to weaponize difference, to use a child's vulnerability as a teaching moment for conformity, an act of profound injustice. A group of popular eighth graders in the front rows began to snicker openly, emboldened by the principal's remarks. One boy mimed playing an air piano wildly, earning laughs from his friends. The scene had devolved into a public spectacle, a cruel circus designed to break Arthur. Principal Thompson returned his gaze to Arthur. His eyes narrowed. "So, Arthur, are you going to continue to be difficult, or are you going to show us something? Anything?" He swept his hand dismissively towards the piano. The weight of the world seemed to press down on Arthur, the combined force of the principal's disdain and the student's mockery crushing him. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a suffocating blanket of judgment. In that moment, something shifted within Arthur. The shame, the anxiety, the intense sensory overload coalesced into a single quiet resolve. He would not give them the reaction they expected. He would not cry or flee or break down. He would not be the problem student they saw. He would show them something indeed, but it wouldn't be what Principal Thompson intended. It would be something far beyond his narrow comprehension, a silent, powerful retort, delivered not through words, but through the only language that truly allowed Arthur to express the depth of his soul, a language they were about to be utterly unprepared for. His fingers, previously trembling, now felt strangely calm, almost purposeful. With a quiet, almost imperceptible sigh, Arthur took another slow step toward the grand piano. His movement was deliberate, unhurried, a stark contrast to the agitated energy of the principal and the restless audience. He settled onto the polished piano bench, his posture still rigid, but his gaze, for the first time, lifted to meet the keys. His long, slender fingers hovered for a moment, tracing invisible patterns just above the ivory and ebony, a fleeting moment of contemplation. The principal, clearly expecting a single clumsy note or a hesitant, fumbling attempt at a scale, leaned forward, a smug expression tightening his lips, ready to deliver another cutting remark, already planning his next public indictment of Arthur's perceived defiance and incompetence. Then Arthur's hands descended. The first notes were soft, almost a whisper, a delicate, melancholic arpeggio that seemed to float in the air, filling the vast auditorium with an unexpected sweetness. It wasn't a scale, nor was it a simple melody. It was something far more intricate, a complex weave of chords that seemed to build upon each other, creating a rich, profound texture. The principal's planned speech caught in his throat, his expression freezing in mid-smirk. A hush fell over the audience, deeper and more profound than any silence before, as if every person in the room had collectively held their breath, caught completely off guard by the sheer, unexpected beauty emanating from the stage, an almost ethereal sound. As Arthur continued, the melody began to emerge, a hauntingly beautiful composition that was clearly his own. It spoke of quiet solitude, of unspoken emotions, of a deep longing and an extraordinary sensitivity. His fingers danced across the keys with a fluidity and precision that belied his previous stiffness, a blur of motion as if guided by an unseen force. Each note was perfectly weighted, each phrase imbued with an emotional depth that resonated through the room, silencing every whisper, every snicker, every cynical thought. The music flowed effortlessly, a complex tapestry of sound that shifted between powerful crescendos and delicate, almost ethereal passages, painting a vivid soundscape of his inner world, a revelation. The principal's face began to transform, the smugness draining away, replaced by a look of utter disbelief, then dawning comprehension, and finally, a profound, almost uncomfortable awe. His jaw slackened, and his eyes, which had been so full of disdain, now reflected a stunned, bewildered wonder. He leaned back slowly, his rigid posture dissolving, his body language softening as he became just another captivated listener, utterly spellbound by the unexpected brilliance unfolding before him. The music was not just technically perfect, it was soulful, expressive, brimming with an emotional intelligence he had so vehemently denied Arthur possessed, an undeniable testament to the boy's profound inner life, shattering all his preconceived notions. The students, who minutes before had been ready to mock, were now sitting in rapt silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and fascination. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, completely absorbed in the unfolding musical revelation. A few had tears glistening in their eyes, unexpectedly moved by the raw beauty and emotional power of the piece. The music transcended all their prior judgments, all the labels and assumptions. It spoke directly to their hearts, bypassing intellect and prejudice, revealing the true unseen essence of the quiet, misunderstood boy on stage. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated talent, undeniable and profoundly moving, a silent rebuke to every negative word ever spoken about him. Arthur played on, seemingly oblivious to the stunned silence, lost in the intricate world of his own creation. His head was tilted slightly, his eyes half closed, as if he were listening to an internal melody that guided his every move. The music built to a final, breathtaking crescendo, a powerful surge of sound that filled every corner of the auditorium, then gently receded into a series of delicate, echoing chords, ending on a single, resonant note that hung in the air, vibrating with an almost tangible sense of peace and profound resolution. When his hands finally lifted from the keys, the silence that followed was not one of expectation or judgment, but of utter, reverent astonishment, a collective understanding. The reverberation of the final note hung in the air for a long moment, a tangible presence in the stunned auditorium. No one moved, no one coughed, no one whispered. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of revelation and collective awe. Principal Thompson stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the color drained from his face. His carefully constructed facade of authority and certainty had utterly crumbled, replaced by a raw, naked disbelief. His eyes, fixed on Arthur, now held not a trace of the earlier contempt, but a dawning, uncomfortable realization, an almost visible shift from smugness to profound shock, then a slow, agonizing shame for his earlier words and actions. Among the students, the reaction was equally dramatic, though more varied. Some sat utterly transfixed, their eyes wide with wonder, as if they had just witnessed a miracle. Others, particularly those who had snickered or mocked earlier, now looked down at their laps, their faces flushed with embarrassment. A few exchanged quick, furtive glances, a shared acknowledgement of their own complicity in the principal's earlier cruelty. Their earlier assumptions about Arthur, that he was strange or less capable or merely a disruption, had been shattered into 1,000 pieces by the undeniable, overwhelming power of his music, leaving them speechless and utterly re-evaluating their entire perception of him. Miss Davies, Arthur's homeroom teacher, who had often felt a mixture of pity and frustration towards him, now had tears openly streaming down her face. She sat utterly still, her hands clasped tightly, her heart aching with a complex mix of regret and profound admiration. She saw not just a performance, but a window into Arthur's soul, a depth of emotion she had never imagined possible from the quiet, seemingly detached boy. Her gaze softened, filled with a newfound respect and a quiet remorse for all the time she had dismissed him, for all the moments she had failed to see beyond his outward behaviors, now understanding the vast chasm between his quiet demeanor and his rich inner world. Even the popular 8th graders, who had been the loudest in their mockery, were silenced. The boy who had mimed playing an air piano now sat rigid, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a look of bewildered awe. His friends too were quiet, their usual expressions of cool indifference replaced by slack-jawed astonishment. The laughter had died in their throats, replaced by a sudden, uncomfortable awareness of their own harshness and prejudice. The music had bypassed their social defenses, touching something deeper, something universally human within them, forcing them to confront the stark contrast between their shallow judgments and Arthur's profound, undeniable genius. A moment stretched, interminable, thick with unspoken apologies and unacknowledged shifts in perception. Then, tentatively, a single student in the back row began to clap. It was a soft, hesitant sound at first, then another and another, until a slow, building wave of applause swept through the auditorium. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause given at school assemblies. It was genuine, heartfelt, a spontaneous outpouring of admiration, and perhaps a collective atonement. The sound grew, swelling into a thunderous roar, a standing ovation for the boy they had so profoundly underestimated, a visible sign of the profound impact he had just made on every single person in that room. Principal Thompson, still visibly shaken, finally managed to clear his throat. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He simply stared at Arthur, then at the roaring crowd, then back at Arthur, a flicker of something akin to shame passing across his face. He had sought to expose a weakness, and instead Arthur had revealed an extraordinary strength, not just his own, but the potential for empathy and transformation within the very community that had judged him. The shift in perception was not just intellectual, it was deeply emotional, a profound reckoning with their own biases, catalyzed by the undeniable transformative power of Arthur's silent musical revolution. As the thunderous applause finally began to subside, Principal Thompson, still looking as if he'd seen a ghost, took a hesitant step forward. His usual commanding presence was gone, replaced by a tentative, almost fragile demeanor. He cleared his throat again, this time managing a strained, "Arthur, that was truly extraordinary." The words felt inadequate, hollow even, given his earlier cruel performance. He looked directly at Arthur, something he had rarely done before, and for the first time his gaze held genuine respect, though it was tinged with a deep, visible shame. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was an undeniable acknowledgement of something profound and unexpected, a breaking of his own rigid stance. Before the principal could say anything more, a remarkable thing happened. Mr. Harrison, the music teacher, rushed onto the stage, his face beaming with a mixture of elation and pride. He ignored Principal Thompson completely and went directly to Arthur, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Arthur," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that was breathtaking. I've never heard anything like it. That composition, it's a masterpiece. Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was filled with an unadulterated admiration, a stark contrast to the dismissive tones Arthur usually encountered from school staff. This was not a question of ability, but of genuine, heartfelt curiosity and respect. Then, from the audience, Sarah, a usually reserved girl who sat 2 rows behind Arthur in homeroom, stood up. She was known for her quiet kindness, and her voice, though soft, carried clearly in the now hushed auditorium. "Arthur, that was so beautiful," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It made me feel everything." Her simple, honest words resonated deeply, a pure expression of empathy and connection that bypassed all the social barriers that had previously existed between them. It was a moment of profound validation, a peer acknowledging his inner world, seeing him not as an anomaly, but as a person capable of extraordinary emotional expression, and a human being. Principal Thompson watched these interactions, his expression shifting from shame to a sort of bewildered understanding. He saw the genuine admiration, the raw emotion that Arthur's music had evoked, and it was a language he suddenly, powerfully, comprehended. He cleared his throat once more, his voice now softer, less authoritative. "Arthur," he began, a genuine tremor in his voice, I was wrong. We were all wrong. Your talent, it's undeniable. I want to apologize, truly." It wasn't a forced apology. It was a humbled confession. A man confronting his own narrow-mindedness in the face of undeniable genius, a recognition of his profound error in judgment, and a tacit admission of the harm he had caused. He then made a symbolic gesture. "Arthur, I would be honored if you would consider performing again. Not for a lesson, not as a requirement, but as a valued member of our school, to share your gift with us any time you wish." It was an invitation, a true acknowledgement of his worth, not just as a student, but as an artist, as an individual with a unique and powerful contribution to make. It wasn't just about music, it was about inclusion, about valuing difference, about creating a space where his unique brilliance could flourish without fear of judgment. The very man who had tried to humiliate him was now offering him a stage of his own choosing, a profound reversal of roles. Arthur, still quiet, still self-contained, didn't smile or outwardly react with joy or surprise. His expression remained soft, contemplative, his eyes still holding that distant, inward gaze. He simply nodded once, a small, subtle gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't an acceptance of their apology, not an immediate embrace of their newfound admiration, but an acknowledgement of the shift. He had been seen, truly seen, for the first time by many of them, and that in itself was a victory. The environment had changed, subtly but profoundly. The oppressive structure had cracked, revealing a glimmer of understanding, a fragile but powerful seed of respect that had finally been planted, promising future growth. Later that evening, the quiet of Mrs. Henderson's bungalow was a balm after the overwhelming sensory input of the day. Arthur sat on the worn floral couch in the living room, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle spread across the coffee table in front of him. He wasn't actively working on it, his gaze fixed on a distant point, replaying the day's events in his mind. The applause, the stunned faces, the principal's stammered apology. It was all processed with the same meticulous detail as a musical score, each moment filed away, analyzed and understood in his unique way. The shift in the atmosphere at school had been palpable, a sudden, almost disorienting change from hostility to something akin to reverence, a profound and unexpected reversal. Mrs. Henderson sat beside him, gently placing a hand on his knee. She didn't press him for details, knowing Arthur would share when he was ready, in his own time. She simply sat, her presence a comforting anchor. After a long silence, Arthur finally spoke, his voice soft, almost a whisper. The sound, it felt right. He paused, searching for the precise words to describe the intricate internal experience. Like the pieces finally fit. He gestured vaguely toward the unfinished puzzle, a rare metaphorical expression from him, illustrating the profound sense of harmony and completion he had felt when his music resonated with the outside world, finally making sense to others. Mrs. Henderson squeezed his knee. It was beautiful, Arthur. So beautiful. Everyone heard it. Her voice was thick with emotion, a mix of pride and relief. She had witnessed so many years of his quiet struggle, his unrecognized brilliance, and to see him finally acknowledged, truly seen, was a deeply moving experience for her. She knew the music was more than just a performance. It was a window into his soul, a powerful declaration of his inner world, a language that finally transcended the barriers of conventional communication, allowing him to truly connect. His music was his voice, clear and undeniable, speaking volumes where his words often faltered. Arthur nodded slowly, still gazing into the middle distance. The colors. When I played, they were very bright. He spoke of his synesthetic experience, the visual symphony that accompanied his musical creation, a private joy now briefly shared. And the principal. He looked confused, then quiet. He described Principal Thompson's transformation with a detached accuracy, processing the shift in the man's demeanor not with triumph, but with an objective observation, as if analyzing a particularly complex mathematical equation. He didn't express joy or anger, just a deep, almost clinical understanding of the cause and effect, the predictable outcome of an unpredictable action. He understood, Arthur, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice gentle. He truly understood. Everyone did. She hoped he felt the weight of that understanding, the profound impact his music had made. She knew the struggle wouldn't magically disappear, that the world wouldn't instantly become perfectly suited to him, but this was a monumental step, a crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had surrounded him for so long. It was a moment of profound validation, not just for his talent, but for his very being, an acknowledgement that his unique way of experiencing the world was not a deficit, but a powerful, beautiful asset. Arthur turned his head slightly, his hazel eyes finally meeting hers, a rare, direct gaze that held a quiet intensity. It felt quiet, he reiterated, referring not to the lack of noise, but to the cessation of internal turmoil, the peace that came with being truly heard, truly seen. It was a quiet triumph, a silent revolution of the self, a moment where the world finally aligned with his inner harmony. In that intimate conversation, in the safe haven of his foster home, Arthur processed the momentous shift, not with fanfare, but with the quiet dignity that defined him, a profound inner realization that something fundamental had irrevocably changed, opening a door to acceptance. The reverberations of Arthur's performance echoed throughout Northwood Middle School in the days that followed. Conversations among staff were noticeably different, tinged with a new humility and an awakened sense of possibility. Miss Davies, Arthur's homeroom teacher, was observed speaking animatedly with Mr. Harrison, the music teacher, in the faculty lounge. "I had no idea, Mr. Harrison," she confessed, her voice laced with genuine regret. I always saw him as difficult, a challenge." Mr. Harrison nodded gravely. "We all did, Miss Davies, and that's our failing. He was speaking to us all along, just not in the way we were listening." Their conversation was not about blame, but about shared introspection, a collective recognition of missed opportunities and ingrained biases. Principal Thompson, still visibly chastened, called a special staff meeting later that week. His usual booming pronouncements were replaced by a subdued, reflective tone. He began by directly acknowledging his own misguided actions, stating, "I made a grave error in judgment regarding Arthur Finch. My approach was not only unprofessional, but fundamentally disrespectful and harmful." This uncharacteristic display of vulnerability from the principal sent a ripple of surprise through the room. He then shifted the focus to the broader issue of inclusion, emphasizing the need to reevaluate how the school supported and understood all its neurodivergent students, urging a shift from managing problems to nurturing unique potentials within the student body. New opportunities began to emerge subtly at first. Mr. Harrison, inspired by Arthur's talent, started a new informal music lab after school, specifically inviting Arthur to participate, offering him access to the practice rooms and a range of instruments. He didn't pressure Arthur to join, simply extended the invitation, recognizing that genuine engagement meant respecting Arthur's autonomy and sensory needs. This was a direct, practical step towards fostering his talent in a supportive environment, moving beyond the confines of a rigid curriculum. The music room, once just another classroom, became a potential sanctuary, a place where Arthur's unique abilities could finally find a dedicated space for exploration and growth. More inclusive behaviors, slowly, tentatively, began to manifest among students. Sarah, the girl who had spoken up in the auditorium, started leaving small, encouraging notes in Arthur's locker, sometimes just a simple drawing of a piano, sometimes a few kind words. Other students, previously indifferent or even unkind, started offering quiet nods in the hallway or holding doors for him. These gestures were small, almost imperceptible shifts, but for Arthur, who had been an outcast for so long, they were monumental. It wasn't a sudden embrace, but a gradual thawing, a nascent recognition of his humanity and his extraordinary talent, a quiet acceptance rather than active avoidance. The school library also saw a change. The librarian, previously strict about silence, now allowed Arthur to spend his lunch breaks there, even providing him with a pair of noise-cancelling headphones when the noise from the cafeteria became too overwhelming. She also began to acquire books on savant syndrome and neurodiversity, subtly placing them on prominent displays, fostering a culture of curiosity and understanding among the student body. These small, practical accommodations signaled a deeper shift in institutional thinking, a move towards genuinely supporting diverse learning and processing styles, demonstrating a commitment to creating an environment that valued comfort and understanding over rigid adherence to rules. This quiet revolution, sparked by Arthur's silent performance, began to subtly transform the school's culture. It was not an overnight miracle, but a gradual, organic shift, fueled by genuine empathy and a newfound appreciation for hidden talent. The emotional maturity of the adults and students, once clouded by prejudice, was slowly blooming, opened by the undeniable power of Arthur's music. His quiet act had become a powerful catalyst, igniting conversations, inspiring new approaches, and breaking down invisible barriers, proving that true change often begins with a single, profound moment of unexpected revelation, demonstrating the enduring power of human connection and mutual respect. Weeks turned into months, and life at Northwood Middle School, while not entirely transformed, certainly operated with a softer edge. Arthur still preferred the quiet corners, still found solace in his routines, and still struggled with the unpredictable currents of social interaction. His unique way of perceiving the world remained vibrant and complex, a private universe that few could fully comprehend. The general din of the hallways still sometimes overwhelmed him, and direct eye contact could still feel like a searing light. He was still Arthur, profoundly himself, and that was his enduring dignity, a quiet testament to the unyielding nature of his being, a constant and beautiful truth. Yet something fundamental had indeed changed. The heavy cloak of invisibility he had worn for so long had been partially lifted. The wary glances had softened into curious, sometimes respectful gazes. The whispers were no longer about his weirdness, but occasionally, reverently, about that amazing music. He wasn't suddenly popular, nor did he seek to be. What mattered was the undeniable shift in perception, the crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had previously surrounded him, allowing a sliver of acceptance to filter through. He carried himself with the same quiet grace, but now there was a subtle, almost imperceptible sense of belonging, a fragile connection that had previously been absent. Principal Thompson, while never fully shedding his formal demeanor, now offered Arthur a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement whenever their paths crossed, a silent gesture of respect that spoke volumes. The occasional invitations to play the piano in the music room or at school events continued, always offered without pressure, always honoring Arthur's autonomy. He sometimes accepted, sometimes didn't, But the very act of the offer, the implicit recognition of his talent, was a profound validation. The stage, once an arena of humiliation, had become a space of potential, a symbol of his newfound quiet power, a place where his voice could resonate, freely and beautifully. His foster mother, Mrs. Henderson, observed these subtle shifts with a quiet joy. She saw the light in Arthur's eyes, a newfound peace that came from being genuinely seen, if only by a few. The burden of fighting for his recognition had lessened, replaced by a sense of hope for his future. She knew the world would always be a complex place for Arthur, full of challenges and misunderstandings. But now a door had opened. His journey was far from over, but the first crucial step towards acceptance had been taken, paving the way for further understanding and a deeper appreciation of the rich tapestry of human experience, a journey of continuous growth. The music room, once just another part of the school, had become a symbol of possibility. It was a space where difference was not just tolerated, but celebrated, where the unconventional mind could find its voice. Arthur still spent hours there, not under duress but by choice, exploring the intricate harmonies that lived within him, transforming them into tangible beauty. His music became his bridge to the world, a universal language that transcended social awkwardness and communication barriers, allowing him to express the profound depths of his being in a way that words never could. It was a testament to the power of artistic expression. Arthur, seated at the piano in the empty auditorium after school, sunlight streaming through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He plays a soft, contemplative melody, not for an audience, but for himself. His face is serene, his fingers moving with fluid grace across the keys. The struggle to be understood continues in the broader world, but here, in this moment, a barrier has been broken, a door opened. He is still different, still unique, but now his extraordinary talent has been seen, acknowledged, and honored. His dignity is intact, and in his quiet strength, a profound transformation has begun, echoing far beyond the walls of the school, a beautiful testament to the power of unseen potential.